Can you think of a situation where you really wanted that job, but the negotiation process didn't go quite right? Or can you think of a time where you wanted to hire that right candidate, but for whatever reason, the process of recruitment didn't work out the way you wanted it to for your business or the team that you lead? Welcome to the podcast. I'm Matthew Karakalakis. I'm the host of Rolling Through Negotiations. This episode is going to be one that's going to really impact you because we have Rachelle Towart. She's the Managing Director of Pipeline Talent. What she focuses her Aboriginal business on is executive talent acquisition. So what this really means is she can help you in that recruitment or job hunt process. Before we get into this episode, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of these lands. Let's pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge the Kaurna peoples whose lands we're recording this episode from. Let's roll. Rachelle, welcome to Rolling Through Negotiations podcast.
Thanks, Matt.
One of the things I'd love to hear from you, and I reckon our listeners would love to hear your insights on this as well, is in the career development, the recruitment, the pathways into employment work that you do and positions that you've filled for Aboriginal people. What are some of the real traps where those employment opportunities can go wrong?
Yeah, great question. And there are a lot of things that can go wrong in recruitment. And I think for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leaders, the pathway into senior leadership is rarely linear. The challenge is not the lack of talent or capability. It's how merit is defined, how it's assessed, and how it's recognised within the systems that were never designed for us in mind. And I think when negotiating, particularly with government or corporate organisations, I'm very clear about one thing, and that is merit and equity are not opposites. Merit is not neutral. It's shaped by access, exposure, networks, opportunities. And when Aboriginal leaders are assessed solely through narrow traditional metrics, their capability is often underestimated or misunderstood. And so at Pipeline, it's our role to translate leadership capacity across cultural context. And that means that, helping organisations understand that governance experience, the leadership, cultural authority, and the lived systems when navigation through the not soft skill, their advanced leadership capabilities. And so when we challenge unconscious bias directly, this includes bias around communication styles, career pathways, confidence, and how long someone has in a role. And we work with the selection panels to reframe questions, assess the transferable skills, and interrogate, terrible word, their own assumptions before decisions are made. The results are not lowering the bar. It's finally seeing the full picture of Indigenous leadership excellence and placing Aboriginal leaders into roles on merit with integrity and with the support they need to succeed.
And I think you make a really good point in terms of the strengths that Aboriginal people can bring into the workplace that can be culturally based, leadership based, can be outside the typical westernised ways of seeing contributions in the workplace. But if they're appreciated, can make a workplace a heck of a lot stronger. So I think, yes, there are great attributes, great skill sets. Let's not forget the skill sets that Aboriginal people also bring. Perhaps they also need to be acknowledged strongly.
Yeah, which is why, in a way, Pipeline last year was thinking about what does a diversification strategy look like for my business. And we had two issues. One of them was that, and I'm sure we're going to go into the creation of DreamJobs, and the reason we created DreamJobs was purely around racist hate online. But the second part that we've done is we've created to Pipeline Talent an opportunity to call Mob Connects. And Mob Connects is blind profiling candidates. So you can go onto our website and you can see candidates, because we had, at any one time we had between 150 to 250 actively looking candidates, but we didn't have the roles for them. So we thought, why not create, if you like, a Tinder for organisations to go in and say, Matthew's looking for a lawyer. Do you have anybody? And if we do, their blind profile will come up. So it takes away some of the biases that we were seeing around, that person's not black enough, that person's too light, that person doesn't have the skill set that we're after. And so we were trying to come up with a really clever idea around reverse marketing a person through a blind profile, and we think we've managed to hit the mark with it. So I think that there's a real opportunity to, because some people as leaders, they get to a certain point and they don't want people to know that they're actively looking, or because, their board might find out and the Chinese whispers happen around recruitment. So, blind profiling, we think, is certainly working for our candidates now.
And what about if you've got somebody who is looking for a job and they want to be able to negotiate that role and that job? What can you say, Rachelle, if we have some brothers and sisters or some other good people out there who are listening to us right now, they want to be able to get their dream job? What are some negotiation tips you could give them?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many of them, but you're more or less doing business development for yourself in your career, right? So a lot of people don't think about career planning, and, they normally just get tapped on the shoulder and say, hey, come and work for me, we'll give you more of a pay increase, and then you move. And then you realise that that's not the job for you because you're not happy, but then somebody taps you on the shoulder again because they've seen something else in you. And so you get promoted, and you're not necessarily finding your dream job. And famous guy by the name of Walt Disney said, if you don't have a dream, how can a dream come true? And I'm such a big believer in that, but I think you've always got to have a plan too. So getting yourself as an individual to sit down and actually do a strategic planning exercise with yourself and your career. Where do you want to go and how you're going to get there? And so, there are so many things that people just get tapped on the shoulder. And the number one reason, particularly in this economy that we're in at the moment, the number one reason that somebody is moving from one job to another is purely based on remuneration. And, we always want to bring that back to value alignment, because value alignment, if you don't have it, you're never going to last in that organisation for a long period of time. And that might be your own business, or it might, wherever that might be for you. But I think sitting down with your own self first and going, because there's so many steps that you can go through negotiation and, when you get there. But I think negotiating with yourself is the first thing that you need to do, and go, where do I want to go and how am I going to get there? What is my dream job? And, finding yourself, like, if you do want to be that lawyer, ringing, somebody like Matthew and going, hey, I really want to be a lawyer. How do I get there? So before you even get to the negotiation stage of negotiating with a workplace, I think you need to negotiate with yourself on what is that goal. Because, when I left school, I wanted to be a hairdresser. And my aunt said, you can go and volunteer down at the local hairdressing salon for a week and then I'll sign you up for an apprenticeship. And I lasted half a day because I wasn't sweeping up no one's hairs, and I realised that wasn't my career. And so I went down another path, and I went, and it takes a few iterations of, where you land and how you're going to get there. But I think, balancing, finding that balancing values, so aligning Indigenous cultural values with the work priorities is something that you're always going to have to be thinking of when you are looking at career. And I think one of the most persistent myths in the space is that Indigenous cultural values and corporate priorities are in tension. And in reality, they're often deeply aligned when organisations are prepared to listen. And Indigenous values centre on responsibility, accountability, long-term thinking, collective benefits and respect. And these are the same principles that sit at the heart of strong governance, sustainable growth and ethical leadership. It's not, the work is about alignment, not compromise. And, you know, that when organisations genuinely, and I mean genuinely, align cultural values with, you know, the business objectives, or the outcomes are stronger for everyone. Retention improves, leadership pipelines diversify, and decision-making becomes more robust. And I think that's why, you know, with Pipeline and DreamJobs, we don't ask organisation to adopt Indigenous values as a symbolic gesture. We ask them to embed those values into how they recruit, how they lead, and how they measure success. And that's where the real change happens.
It's interesting you speak this way, because I've worked on quite a few legal matters where I've represented Aboriginal people who have had their rights severely harmed in the workplace, whether it be through racial discrimination, adverse actions under the employment legislation, and often these cultural values aren't respected in workplaces the way that they should be.
Yeah.
I think that from what I've seen, there definitely are instances where workplaces don't want to be open, aware, and truly connected with the wisdom and intelligence that Aboriginal people can bring in the workplace.
Yeah.
But I also think that there is another element, and it's about listening to you speak right now that's really opened my mind on this, which is if we can have more communication, more negotiation, and how you spoke a moment ago, Rachelle, people being really clear in their mind's eye what they want and expect in the workplace, to then be able to start negotiating from that perspective to tailor that role that they're really looking for. And I think sometimes that place of empowerment can be a better way of negotiating, shaping and crafting the position and role that they really want to be working in. Because if we go into any negotiation context, including on the job hunt, and we see, oh, this is what the other party wants, all these things, which effectively could be what a job ad is that's put out there by the employment agency or by a corporate that's about to hire somebody. And if we are solely trying to meet those characteristics without also communicating, well, hey, these are the things that we want, to then see if there can be an alignment in those values that you're speaking of, then we'd be doing ourselves a disservice in that job hunt process, but also doing that organisation a disservice because we haven't opened up and shown them what it is exactly that we're wanting.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, Matthew, because particularly in the work culture that we've created, or the workplace cultures that we're now living in, where, you know, work-life balance is such a hot issue. The working from home, absolutely a hot issue. And I have my own theories on, you know, the working from home piece. I don't like it. I think for me, I want to see how leaders lead, and I don't believe that you can do that from behind a screen. You know, how do you show somebody your skill set that you have as well? So grit, drive, determination, passion. How do you show that from behind a screen? So I want to get people back into the workplace. My most pet-hated question at the end of an interview is, what's your work-life balance? What does work-life balance look like for you? And I'm going, well, the work is on you to do, and how you balance that is again on you. You know, me as an employer are never going to say no to, you can't go to your child's dance recital or, you know, attend a medical appointment, but I need the work done. So how you do that, that's, you know, but I do think that it always comes back to value alignment. And if you're not working for an organisation that values you, then, but you know, potentially it's time to move on. But we get put into, you know, we're offered too much money as well. So it's really hard to then move from one job to the next and make sure that your lifestyle is still maintained. And again, I go back to that, when you're having that career conversation with yourself, you know, what sort of lifestyle do you want to be able to live in order to be able to do your job? Because when we get older, we're thinking about the work-life balance. We're thinking about how we're looking after aging parents, how we're looking after grandchildren, how we're looking after, you know, the different responsibilities that we have. You know, do we want to be able to afford to go on a yearly holiday? And all of these things come into the lifestyle planning, and that helps with career planning, because in order for me to, look after my aging parents, look after my young children, have a yearly holiday, I need to hit a six-figure salary. So what are the jobs that are in that six-figure salary bracket, so I can then work my way towards those? And that's how I then negotiate with myself. So I'm able to negotiate. I'm asked all the time to review policies and procedures of organisations to make them culturally safe, which is more than just cultural awareness. It's more than, because I don't do cultural awareness, it's not my jam, but what I do is make sure that organisations have more than just sorry business leave within their staff handbook, because cultural leave is more than it, and organisations who are really truly committed to reconciliation have to think outside the box. There are organisations now that are thinking about paying a cultural loading for wages, which is a really interesting thing for me. If you've got a person who's doing the job at this level and a person that's doing the same job, but their requirements are that they've got to be Aboriginal because it's a designated Aboriginal position, then the cultural load isn't just 9 to 5. So we need to work out a potential remuneration for a cultural loading, which the university sector is leading the way in doing so.
And you do a lot of your work in the executive recruitment level. Just say we have some Aboriginal leaders listening in now and they're really curious and wanting to have a seat at that board table with big listed corporations.
It's a question that I get asked
all
the time. Everybody wants to be on an AS list, or particularly a paid board, a remunerated board. I think that's the key here. And because we do give a lot of our time to non-paid boards, as we all do. Recently we did quite a big search for Woolworths, for their Indigenous Advisory Board, and we also did a list of 200 for the National Indigenous Australians Agency for emerging and current board members. So that brought in to our talent pool over 1,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leaders. And so we've got the numbers. It's now we need the opportunities. People ask me, well, how do I get those opportunities? And I don't know the answer to that. Only that I know that most board placements that are in that top market happen when you have great relationships with people. And having a membership at the MCG is not going to be it's going to be helpful. Being at events and meeting people and not be introverted is my big thing. And asking people those questions: how did you get there? How do I get to know what you know? I famously wrote to Gail Kelly when I was the CEO of the Australian Indigenous Leadership Centre and said to her, we had $14,000 in the bank, and I said, I wrote her a letter, Dear Auntie Gail, I'd like to have lunch with you and 10 of your rich friends. And she could either say yes or no, and thankfully she said yes, and I made $1.4 million from that lunch. And
that's beautiful.
Just having the confidence to put yourself in the right places, not being behind screens, getting yourself back out to, again, it's asking yourself, and using your own story. I think that story is not an add-on to leadership. For Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, story is evidence. And our lived experiences teaches us how to navigate the complexities and negotiate the systems and hold multiple responsibilities and lead us through uncertainty. And I think yet too often these experiences are discounted in a recruitment process because they clearly don't fit neatly into the CV template, particularly around boards and, how do you put your experience through a CV template? And I think, we at Pipeline intentionally create space for story. It's not a sentiment, but it's as substance, and story reveals how someone thinks, how they lead under pressure, how they want to build trust, how they make decisions. And I think for Aboriginal leaders, telling our story is also an act of reclaiming authority. It shifts the narrative from the deficit to strength and from exception to excellence. And, I think that's where we need to be. I'm constantly, every person who calls Pipeline and says, hey, can you find us a CEO or a board member or, an up-and-coming and emerging leader, we have stories to tell and we have people to present and we are visible. We've got some amazing leaders like Shelley Cable, at ANZ. We've got Adam Bray at Woolworths, Sarah Stewart at Coles, some really great young change makers who are making such a visible impact in the way that Aboriginal leaders look, feel, do, in that knowing, being and doing space. And my dream is to, I want to interview, 10 Aboriginal executives to go, this is how we get here, so that there is a resource that we can start using as a map to going, Uncle Tom Kalma, how did you get here? What are the lessons learned along the way? Who are the people that you were mentored by? What are the things that we shouldn't be doing? What are the things that we should be doing? So I think that there's a real opportunity to learn from our leaders, but also not forget the up and coming. We just placed recently at the Australian Indigenous Governance Institute, a CEO, and the board was really brave that they didn't, they appointed a future leader, not a leader who had that, typical path trajectory. And I can already see, such a great, amazing change and a great opportunity that when you take a risk, or you're not just ticking a box, you're really having a thoughtful play around what does leadership look like.
There's a person who is recognised as that future leader and they have got a lot of interest from a particular organisation. Because we all have this, there's what's it known as, the imposter syndrome. We all have this feeling of imposter syndrome. And I can imagine for a future leader, if there's a great fuss made about them, hey, we want them to come in and be the CEO or be a manager or lead this particular area of our business, and they're really not ready. They know they're not ready. But the organisation may be coming from the perspective of that future leadership, seeing the values they have, seeing the alignment between where that person is and what they need in the organisation for the future. So do you have anything that you can say to help empower somebody who might be experiencing that opportunity to help them overcome the feelings of imposter syndrome that might come about in that kind of situation?
Yeah, I think imposter syndrome is an interesting one. You've got to feel comfortable in your own shoes, and I think it's easy to blame or to talk about imposter syndrome. But if you're any good at what you do, you need to put that little person, that imposter, on your shoulder and walk proudly with them on your shoulder. For many, many years, I called myself the accidental CEO. Twofold, because I was an accident waiting to happen, fell up the stage on many occasions to go and speak, or I fell in the flowers, laying a wreath at the War Memorial in a very sombre occasion, and every media outlet was behind me. It was the most shameful thing that I've ever done in my life. I was on billboards and buses and on an ATM for Westpac for 3 months, and lots of other things that I could obviously hide behind and go, oh, that's not me, but actually it is. And to stand and be proud of who you are and the experiences that you have and what's in front of you, because I I have no plan of retirement in my 10 years until I don't love what I do. And I think when you do find the job that you love to do and that you get up every morning excited to be doing that job, there is no imposter syndrome because that's who you are. And so, again, going back to you finding what your dream job is, and it will happen for you. You know, I went this year and did a, stupid, crazy thing. You know, those 2 business ideas that I had. I thought, creating a second business, I've had one, the second one will be easy. Well, it's not. In fact, it's harder than what the first one was. I think because I just jumped in so blindly. And being a startup, again, 10 years older, would think you would be 10 years wiser, but it's actually not. It's, but I had to do something, and I couldn't sit back and continue watching it happen. And so DreamJobs was born out of frustration and from hope. It's, it was a decade of leading Pipeline, and I kept on hearing the same thing from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander candidates. I don't know where the safe jobs are. At the same time, employers were saying, we can't find Aboriginal candidates. And the disconnect was really glaring. And, when I was deleting the word Abo and I was deleting the word, see you next Tuesday, and the racist and vile words that were being blasted on social media, I just went, enough's enough. And so if I didn't do it, somebody was going to have to do it. So while the reason I digress from your question was, having that vision, the vision was simple, but it was ambitious to create a culturally safe platform, an Aboriginal-led job platform where mob could find meaningful opportunities, where employers were held accountable for how they engage, recruit and support Aboriginal people. Then, it came with all sorts of challenges, building technology from scratch, funding it without external investors, asking employers to lift their standards, not just their advertising. We just, spray and pray, and we advertise on Seek and we get all of these candidates. And, we had somebody ring me and go, we used your platform. We didn't get any candidates. And I said, do you ring Seek and ask them this question? Or let me have a look at the job title and it was a debt collector. And I've gone, nobody's applying for that. So let's rework. What does that look like? But, again, do other platforms, do other Aboriginal businesses have to go the extra mile, to do what we do? And I think the answer is that we're always going the extra mile. It's changed the idea that Aboriginal recruitment shouldn't just sit on the margins. It's mainstream workforce development led by mob for mob. And it's not just another job board. It's a statement, and I'm very, very clear on it. It's a statement that Aboriginal talent is here, visible and ready, and the system needs to meet us where we are. And for that, I'm extremely proud that I've made it through. That's all we wanted it to do.
And it sounds like this work that you're doing through DreamJobs is a really powerful way towards closing the gap, particularly in the area of employment. What are 3 common mistakes that you see in the recruitment process, whether those mistakes be by the organisation that's looking for the employee or the employee going through that process as a candidate? But what are 3 common mistakes that you see? And in particular, those kinds of mistakes where the elusive, obvious type of mistakes, those kinds of mistakes that's from the outside, you can say, oh, gee, you shouldn't have said that. But when you're in the middle, it's very easy to make that mistake when you're part of that process. If you have 3 mistakes like that, I think a lot of people would be very interested to hear.
Yeah, I think my three would be over-reliance on resumes and keywords, misplaced signals and, why it happens. I think filtering candidates primarily by keywords, years of experience or education, assuming that a perfect resume equates to, perfect fit. Why it hurts, I think, ignores the soft skills, culture fit, real world problem solving abilities, reduces diversity of thought by rewarding the surface level indicators. I think the number two would be inadequate candidate experiences and communication. And I think why that happens is long hiring processes, disjointed feedback loops or unclear next steps, or ghosting candidates. That damages employer brand reputation and reduces acceptance rates offers. And, we're always with Pipeline around timelines. We've got to have timelines. And then the third would be poor interview structure and bias. And why that happens, unstructured interviews with varying candidate questions, implicit biases influences what is considered a good candidate. I think poor interview structure, communicating, always ask for feedback. It's one of the things that when we started Pipeline, I had to unpack why don't we have Aboriginal leaders in senior roles? And the common feedback that I was getting was that nobody was giving me feedback. So if you're shit at policy, your manager or supervisor needs to tell you that you're shit at policy instead of you continue to applying for policy jobs and you're not winning the policy job. And so asking for feedback that is real, and I use my inverted commas, because feedback isn't, there was just somebody that was better. Feedback is structured, well thought out, well considered feedback to make sure that you are getting, I think there are some quick wins to elevate, recruitment. I think implementing a consistent competency-based interview framework. I think, skill sets, produce skills assessments. One of the things that we did some entry-level recruitment, in our first couple of years of doing work. And I always remember this young guy, we were at a national park and he was doing a ranger's job. And why have we got this table with water jugs set up? And this is where the candidate's sitting. And this is, an awful place to be intimidated by 4 people sitting around for this one person to come in and sit and stare. And I've gone, okay, we're going to do this differently. So I grabbed him and I said, come on, you're going to go and show me what you do. Because he was already acting in the job. He knew the job, but he just didn't need to sit around a table. So we went around and he showed me what he did. And, yeah, he got a promotion, not 1 level, but 2 levels because he was just so excited about what he did. So there's no real way that organisations, there's no rule book when it comes to recruitment. It's just the way that that has been done. So it doesn't mean that it should be done that way in the future.
Yeah, awesome. And so those three pitfalls, 3 mistakes, I think that you said was number 1 is not relying on
The
CVs
resumes.
and resumes alone as some blanket cover-all type approach.
Yeah. And I think people are relying on, the chat GPTs of the world to write their bloody applications. Don't do it. Be real, and don't apply for jobs that are being written by chat GPT as well, because it means that they've given no thought to actually what the job is.
Yes, being authentic in that process. And I think that's really where you're speaking about as well in terms of the other point where you're speaking about the inadequate communications is your second point that you're speaking of. And I think that if organisations are being authentic, then communications will probably flow better. And the third point you spoke about was the poor interview structures. So that if we have authenticity go through that interview process, there probably will be a better structure and flow, like the example you gave as well.
Yeah. And I think, being, and it goes back to, if you are in an interview process, the SMART goal, like how you answer, specific, measurable, attainable, all of those things, that it's such a true reflection on how you should ask a question. You should always go in for, what are they going to ask me? Is there something that I prepared for that I wasn't asked for? Use that time. Prepare for questions that you want to ask the panel, because they're also on interview as well. So it doesn't matter what level you're at, you always got to have questions to the panel. And it's always thought that, if you need some interview coaching, don't go to 20 people, just go to one. 20 people are going to have, as my nan used to say, Rachelle, everybody's got a bum, everybody's got an opinion, and that's, you're going to get 20 opinions when you only need one. And, read your application before you go into an interview. Read the selection criteria before you go into an interview. If you really, really want it, tell them that you really, really want it.
That's awesome. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners before we wrap up this episode?
So you're going to ask me this question and I didn't prepare anything. So I'm unprepared for my interview. Look, I think that we're trying to do recruitment differently, and, we've done some benchmarking this year on having a look at salaries comparable to our non-Indigenous counterparts who are in similar roles. We're about 43% being paid less than. My job is to do some advocating around salary benchmarking, to make sure that we're on an even playing field. My job is to also, start to ask the questions of, why don't we have ASX-listed CEOs? Why don't we have seats at the table for board appointments for mob? That is, how do we get on those boards? How do we make a real difference and change the way of, being an advisory board member to having a seat at the real table? And I couldn't do what I do unless I have an amazing team. We're a small team of 10, but I also always acknowledge my wonderful husband. And for Matthew, your listeners, when I started Pipeline 10 years ago, I also became a mum again. My brother, unfortunately, is a drug user, and my mum rang and said, you need to come and get your brother's baby. And I said, what baby, Mum? And I found myself with a 4-month-old, and then a few months later his brother arrived. And I share that story because being a kinship carer, has its challenges, but it also has its rewards. And I absolutely love what I get to do every single day. And I found my passion for what I do, and I hope your listeners get to find their dream job. And if they want to have a career conversation, reach out to me. I love having career conversations. I love helping people get to find that opportunity for them, and challenge them in, but getting organisations to come to us and say, we are as good as our non-Indigenous competitors in the executive recruitment space, and we have the talent, and they need to come and work for you.
That's beautiful, Rachelle. Thank you for your great work that you do, for being part of the podcast, and our listeners have definitely got a lot out of this episode. So thank you so much for being part of Rolling Through Negotiations podcast.
Thank you.
We trust that you've loved this episode. Share this episode with your friends and subscribe to Rolling Through Negotiations podcast, because if you do this, it helps us continue bringing you more great episodes just like this one. Until next time, us.
Us.